So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the talk on mental wellness by Brandy Christensen. They're from Mental Health America, the Wabash Valley region, and they'll be talking about mental wellness. And thank you for being here, Brandy. We're very excited to have you, and we're excited to nurture this partnership with MHA for the coming mental health awareness weeks or action weeks in the future. So, without further ado, I'll let Brandy start with the presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Pratik, and thank you for asking us to come and talk a little bit about what we do and why mental health is so important. And just as a little prelude, Mental Health America, we try to keep up to date on what folks in our area are concerned about when it comes to their mental health. And we know that we had a mental health epidemic before the pandemic. We called it the pandemic before the pandemic. And so any opportunity that we can get to come and talk to folks, especially in the age group that we see from our data as being the most vulnerable in terms of mental health, the 18 to 24-year-old and the student population, we consider that a win because education is the only is the only method that we know of to let people know, what are we looking for when we're talking about potential mental health challenges. So immediately, we break it down to mental health affecting your ability to live, laugh, love, and learn. But when we look at what a mental health challenge is, and we may get to that a little bit later, I may be jumping the gun, but we're talking about the ability to have those satisfying personal relationships, study, work, learn, participate in daily life activities. So that's just a simple breakdown. So moving to the next slide, when we talk about what is mental health, we just talked about that. But it's also the ability to adapt and be flexible, because we know that life throws curveballs at us, and the more rigid that we are with our expectations, the harder it can be to adapt. So something I've always said, even when I was a substitute teacher, 10 years ago, is flexibility is the key to happiness. And I was telling fourth graders that, but I was also telling myself to remind myself, because life is challenging. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. But when our mental health, when we arrive at a place where simple changes or even big changes are affecting our mental health, we want to take a look at that, because prevention is key, early detection is key, just like any other illness, mental illness. If it's caught early and treated early, you can have a full recovery. So it's like the only illness that we wait till stage 4 to even begin treating, and that's why it's so important for us to get our message out. So moving on, mental disorder is a diagnosable illness affecting a person's thinking, emotional state, behavior, and disrupting, as we said, the ability to work, learn, and carry out those other daily activities. We find people with, substantial mental health challenges, their education can be interrupted. And that can be a lifelong deterrent. When we talk about ACEs, is anybody familiar with ACEs? Okay, so ACEs is what we call the adverse childhood experiences. So those formative years, and it's a test. Anybody can look it up. You can take the test, but really there are I believe it's 10 questions that really can determine the entire lifespan of an individual that's subjected to trauma in their childhood. And we know that, with a lot of mental health disorders, trauma is the seed of that mental health disorder. And statistics say that, a third and potentially even higher of the population is affected by traumatic events that, studies show that it affects our education, our employment, our health choices, and ultimately, our lifespan. So it's pretty important. Um, some mental health disorders or mental illnesses are anxiety, which you're probably pretty familiar with, and we all experience anxiety to an extent. Anxiety can actually work for us, if we're anxious about doing well on a presentation per se, or a test, or just anything. It can actually motivate us to do a better job. But an anxiety disorder is dealing with excessive uneasiness and apprehension, and it can have like a compulsive component, like just talking to a family member last night, someone that we're concerned about, just very compulsive about cleaning, or putting things away, and following behind, and just that's anxiety, is really just feeling like we're out of control, and needing the compulsive component is when we find little areas to have complete control. And it can lend itself to actually be a disorder. And some of the problems that can come from anxiety is it can lead to depression, and depression can lead to anxiety. They kind of go hand in hand. They co-occur quite a bit. Um, some folks with nervous disorders can experience panic attacks, and especially with a class this small, I wouldn't ask anybody to share if they have experienced a panic attack, but panic attacks can feel very life-threatening. We'll probably get into it a little bit more, but they also mimic the same signs and symptoms of a heart attack. So, we oftentimes folks experiencing a panic attack may end up in the hospital, especially the first time, not knowing what it is, and it will be treated, to make sure it's not a heart attack, because the signs and symptoms are so similar. So it can be very terrifying to have a panic attack. Um, Depression, we talked about. Major depressive disorder affects about 1 in 5 Americans, and our young Hoosier folks are experiencing major depressive disorder. I think we're one of the highest in the nation. MHA National releases a paper every year. It's called the State of Mental Health, and they do state by state rankings, and they talk about where we rank in terms of access to mental health care, um, having a population of serious mental illness, substance abuse. It runs the gamut. But what comes in year after year, at least in the 4 years that I've been studying them, is that our youth in Indiana experience very high, especially comparatively to the other states, uh, very, very high major depressive disorder. Um, and stage 4 of major depressive disorder is basically suicide. It can be suicide. So it's very serious, very important that we learn to recognize it in people that we care about, but also in ourselves, right? Um, because when someone is in that dark place, it's very hard to see the future, to see hope. So we talk about it a lot, because uh, it's really a dangerous mental health condition. Um, Bipolar disorder. Has anyone heard of bipolar disorder? Yeah, I think it gets really sort of almost in pop culture kind of abused, because I think there's a lot of ignorance about mental health, and I think that actually contributes to the taboo of talking about it, and the stigma, which when I'm having honest conversations, I'm saying let's replace the word stigma with discrimination, because that's what it is. And it's discrimination in laws, it's discrimination in portrayal. And I mean, a perfect example would be, the military. I've been through. I am a veteran myself, and I have had opportunities in my professional life post military to go to veterans conferences where they oftentimes will tote all of the wonderful things that they're doing to address mental health in the military. I'm sure it's not new news to you to know that suicide rates are extremely high for both active duty service members and especially veterans. So, I always ask the question, what happens if a service member, an active duty service member, attempts to access the mental health care that you're talking about? And the answer is, it's still a discharge. And if you know any military folks at all, that is going to be a major deterrent. I don't know a service member that is going to request treatment for something that's going to result in a discharge. So it's looking at those things that contribute to stigma or, plainly speaking, discrimination that continues to thwart our ability to talk openly about this. But bipolars is a very misunderstood mental health disorder. It can be difficult to treat. It can be difficult to diagnose because it's basically a lot of cycling of ups and downs, and the ups are, um, you know, they're actually enjoyable to the person that experiences them, um, because they can be very productive. Um, they can do a lot of things without sleep, um, and they experience these, what we call, highs, and they self-medicate with compulsive shopping, at times, compulsive sex, a lot of substance use. And then when the downside of the cycle comes, then they dip into that major depressive disorder, and then they have to live with all of the choices that they made when they were on cycling on that high. It is treatable. Um, some of the psychotropic medications that are used have some side effects that are difficult for people, and oftentimes what we find is that folks may get on a medication program and start to feel good and start to feel better, or miss those feelings that they had when they were untreated. And either way, they would take themselves off medication, thereby cycling. So the suicide rate of individuals experiencing bipolar disorder is actually very high, along with schizophrenia, just because very, very difficult mental illnesses to treat, to adjust to treatment, um, and really to even educate about. So that's why it's so important, because the onset of these disorders is actually quite young. Um, so if you imagine an individual, 16 years old, maybe a sophomore, junior in high school, if they've never been educated as to the signs and symptoms, the very illness itself, which is steeped in suspicious thinking and paranoia, makes it very difficult for the individual to reach out. So it's our aim to get in there and talk to folks so that maybe we feel like knowledge is power. So maybe if they start to experience it and they've heard it before, they'll have a reference point. ADHD. Anyone not heard of ADHD? Okay, it's pretty commonly known in our society. A lot of very productive people experience it. Very treatable. And then we have substance use disorder, which generally is accompanied by an undiagnosed mental health disorder. So we're talking about self-medication. I'm probably spending too long on these slides, but you told me to have a conversation, so it's hard though because everybody's muted. I like to, I don't know, I like interaction, but
I mean, we can do that as well. I mean, the slides are just a guideline. So if you want to, go around the room, ask folks what they want to talk about, that's fine by me as well.
yeah, and feel free to to jump in, or if you have any questions, or you want to contribute or get clarification. Um, And I hope I'm not boring you with stuff that you already know.
No, I think it's all relevant. And as I said, we are recording this and making this publicly available. It's going to be there offered asynchronously. So it's reaching a small live audience, but when folks watch it asynchronously with all the other recordings from this week, I think it'll have a greater impact.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, talking about those panic attack symptoms, and I probably should have gone right into the next slide, but uh, we talked about how it mimics an actual heart attack. And for individuals that are going through it the first time, and even subsequently, you know, multiple times, eventually, people tell us, or people who talk, or people who have experienced it, say that there does come a point where they can recognize it and know that, this is what it is. And but at the same time, I have heard a story about an individual that assumed that they were having a panic attack, and it did turn out to be a heart attack. So it is important that we take that into account when we're trying to help somebody out that appears to be having a panic attack. So, what that's going to look like. It could be any number of these symptoms, or just a couple, but that feeling, that like lump in the throat, pain in the chest, and then it just feels surreal, like it's not actually happening, or like out of body kind of experience. Um, Chills and heat, dizzy, lightheaded, sweating. So you can see why people experiencing this think, I might be having the big one. Very scary, uh, but there are treatments for it, um, and you can help somebody who has experienced a panic attack. And a lot of times, like if you're in public, and you see somebody that may be experiencing a panic attack, get them out, get them someplace where they're away from scrutiny, and just being calm and patient and speaking in a very reassuring tone. And if you notice that their breathing is rapid, it can help to just breathe with them, model that breathing, and just ask them, directly, uh, if they know what's happening, um, and if they know what would help. Um, if you're, and I say this for anything, and I know in this post-pandemic world, there's not a lot of touching, but I always do like to tell people, if you do want to touch somebody, ask for permission first, because you don't know where that person's at. You don't know if they're experiencing a trigger for some trauma. But a lot of times we can just sit. You can ask them to sit. You can sit down next to them. You don't want to stand over them and tower. A lot of it's common sense, but if you haven't experienced that, you may be afraid to. Try not to show that if you are. And if in doubt, always just go ahead and rely on 911. Okay. Okay. Um, so we dipped into major depressive disorder. When we're talking about a disorder, because everybody, and there are things, if you lose somebody, you're going to feel like this. If you experience loss, you're going to feel a lot of these things. And that's normal, that's situational. But if you're experiencing, some of the let me see if we can, yeah, there you are. If we can talk about the different signs and symptoms of what depression and anxiety look, and we talked about the chicken and the egg. um Isolation, and here we are in a pandemic, and isolation is forced on us. So you can imagine what folks who are already experiencing anxiety and depression, that further isolation can be really detrimental. But when you're neglecting responsibilities, your hygiene, you're canceling on programs that you would normally go to. You're feeling that, you know what I'm talking about when I talk about self-talk, that really negative self-talk. I'm of the opinion that every person alive experiences self-talk. When our self-talk is worse than anything that we would ever say to anybody else, pay attention to that. Um, Feeling hopeless and worrying all the time. And anger is such a huge overlooked about, under talked about symptom of anxiety. Um, when we're educated in mental health first aid, uh, we're taught to teach that women experience anxiety at higher rates than men. Um, I don't know that I personally believe that. I think that women talk about it and reach out for help more than men. But what I've seen in my career is um, irritability and anger may be more of a manifestation from men, and it's that feeling of loss of control. So I don't believe that anxiety is a gender-based mental health disorder. I just think it manifests differently, but it affects our quality of life. Uh, I would say at least equally, and the people around us, and the people who love us, um, and the people who rely on us to model. Um, when we're anxious, we're feeling like we're on the edge. We're feeling out of control. It's probably affecting our sleeping. If we're depressed, we may be sleeping all the time. If we're feeling that anxiety, we might not be able to sleep at all, or we might be waking up multiple times throughout the night. And those are indications that something's wrong. Hey, we got a new visitor.
Sorry.
No, that's awesome. A lot of times, folks, it's so much easier to go to the doctor for physical symptoms, and doctors are getting so much better at giving little assessments for depression and anxiety, because what we found, and what data shows us is that you'll go in for back pain or stomach issues over and over again, and if there's no underlying cause that can be determined from a physical point of view, mental health affects our physical well-being just as much as our mental well-being. So yeah, those are some of the things, behavioral and physical, and then it affects our ability when we talk about quality of life, because a lot of times the data shows us that it takes an average of 10 years from the onset of a mental health disorder to the point that someone gets help. And we talk about the loss of life. We call them deaths of despair, and it can be suicide, it can be overdose, it can just be dying young due to unhealthy coping mechanisms like smoking, or there's a plethora of reasons why people have deaths of despair. But when we talk about quality of life, the ability, again, to live, laugh, love, and learn, I think that we don't talk about that enough. And every single disorder that we're talking about, you can recover from. And you can not only recover from it, but you can come out of it, with almost, I don't want to say superhuman powers, but I don't think we talk about the recovery aspect and what that means, and what that looks like in terms of just emerging just a better human being all the way around than even maybe perhaps if we hadn't had a mental health disorder. So I preface that because we're talking about bipolar, and this is really a tough nut. Individuals that suffer from bipolar, we talked about the mood swings, and the used to be called manic depression. And actually the founder of Mental Health America had a diagnosis of manic depression. And that's our origin story, back in the 20s, I think 1919, maybe even. This individual attempted suicide after the death of his brother. He was a Yale graduate student, and he had this disorder, and they put him in a mental health institution. And mental health institutions at that time were pretty nasty. They were dirty. They were experimental labs. Individuals were kept in chains. And Clifford Beers was a very young, articulate man that had the ability to write to his legislators and depict the horrific scene that was mental health treatment at that time. And from that was born this, what they called it, the mental hygiene movement. And in like 1953, and I believe that our organization, this is our 70th year anniversary, so right around the same time frame, they Senator McCabe, uh, they called for all of the mental health institutions to mail in their chains and their restraining implements, and they smelted them and created the Liberty Bell for Mental Health America. We have a replica here in our building, and it just talks about victory over mental illness, which 70 years later, we're still talking about the same things. But I like to think it's the celebration of the recovery that can be. So bipolar, yep, it's difficult, but we can recognize it if we're really close to someone, because we can see them when they're on those highs we were talking about, and the irritability. That's the anxiety component, which we also see a lot in PTSD, which is also an anxiety disorder. Um, but the rapid speech can be a giveaway if you've ever known anybody that has this diagnosis. I think we all experience untamed thoughts to some extent, which is kind of a product of our society. But for someone suffering from bipolar, it's racing, and it might show up in a discussion. The rapid speech and the jumping from topic to topic, and the inability to focus, and then that impaired judgment, and impulsiveness that we were talking about. And in severe cases, they can even have those delusions, and the hallucinations, which can be in the form of auditory, it can be visual, it can be just sensational. Um, but it's, as we talked about, it's really, really difficult sometimes to get an accurate um, diagnosis, just because the diagnosing clinician would need to see both sides of that. So, and there are other, there's schizoaffective disorder, which has some similar components and can be super hard to diagnose and can be misdiagnosed and therefore mistreated for a long time. So our brothers and sisters that are dealing with bipolar, this is a tough egg to crack. When we talk about the ADHD, getting more into that, the hyperactivity, impulsiveness, difficulty focusing, and often diagnosed in childhood. Um, we know folks have a hard time in educational settings with this diagnosis. It can really affect relationships, and school and work, and those, just basically for some of the same reasons. It can be really, really hard for folks that can't focus, and that irritability component comes out again as well. So, uh, just for general knowledge, MHA does have support groups for anxiety and depression and bipolar. That's one support group. And then we have one for parents of children with ADHD and ADD. So if you know somebody needs some help, feel free to send them our way. So I'll just move on to the substance use, if that's okay. So We're talking about pleasure pathways here, right? Most people can have a drink or use a prescribed pain medication and not become addicted. The problem is that a person who has a substance use disorder, um, their pleasure pathways light up like a pinball machine the first time that they do it, and then the craving and the need and desire to feel that again and again, um, and potentially to feel the same way they did the first time. That's really what differentiates someone that has a disorder. um, when they're using, they're feeling, really confident, they and exhilarated. They're feeling ways in their brain that they've not been able to feel without the substance, and it feels good. It feels great. It makes them, be able to oftentimes participate in social situations that they weren't able to without the drug or the alcohol. But what we can see from the outside looking in is those behavior changes. Um, aggression that we didn't used to see. You can notice physically. A lot of times the pupils will be dilated or contracted depending on the substance. But the person that you love, so you know what you're seeing. That rapid rambling speech can be, a sign of drug use, amphetamine use, cocaine, some of the what we call uppers. And then on the other side, if we're seeing slurring, that could be, alcohol or opioid use or a combination. But we're going to probably see a, a negative change in their schoolwork or in their work. They might be more tardy or showing up or not showing up at all, missing important events. Um, and then, as you try to talk to them, um, they're going to be more and more dishonest. About what they're doing. They're going to need funds to continue using, and they're not going to care where they get it from, or how. You can experience delusions and hallucinations, drug-induced or alcohol-induced hallucinations, paranoia, and anxiety and irritability. So, very, very uh, tough disorder, and of course we see it all the time. That's probably one thing that we've seen, I don't know, at least the last 3 years or so, in the States invested a lot of money into treatment. We're seeing more substance use disorders than ever before, and it really can tear a family apart. And we've had a lot of people, family members, ask us how to help. It's so hard not to enable people. You love them, you want to help them, but if you talk to a recovering addict themselves, they will state that, you know the boundaries are the most important aspect in terms of their recovery. As long as you keep feeding the addiction, whether that's through enabling, making excuses, giving more money. I've seen grandparents that have hocked their, refinanced their mortgages, um, eh, depleted their retirement funds. y- it's really, really tough. But it's one of those things where, um, they're not going to stop until they have to. So, it's tough. um, so just getting into the facts about mental illness, we talked about that 20% of adults in America have a mental health disorder, and then roughly 6% are experiencing two disorders at the same time. Um, we talked about the early onset of mental illness beginning approximately age 14 for 50% of those lifetime cases. We're seeing onset of anxiety disorders in 8-year-olds, and this was pre-pandemic. We don't have the data yet for the pandemic. So suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in adults. I believe it's the third nationwide in youth, and the second in Indiana, the second leading cause of death. But they're treatable. So as hard as it can, and it's really hard to be a family member supporting someone experiencing a mental health disorder. But I would always say there's always hope because it's treatable, recovery is possible, but recovery is not a destination. It's a journey. So it's an individual journey. It's going to look different for everyone. The important thing is that we can play a part, first of all, just by educating ourselves so we can recognize if something's going on with ourselves and we can get that early intervention and treatment. But also just to know that, you know, we can talk to folks, we can sit them down, we can talk about what we've observed non-judgmentally, um, and we can leave the door open for when they are ready to talk about it. And you always have Mental Health America, whether you want to refer someone to our crisis line or whether you want to come in yourself for a navigator appointment to get connected to services or refer someone. We have peer support services, we have support groups, we have education. So just remember that no matter what, you're not alone. Mental Health America is here for you. And we have many partners as well that we can work together with. So we're going to get into some warning signs of suicidal thoughts because this is the number one thing that we talk about because we are a suicide prevention agency first. And it can be really intimidating to think about having a conversation with someone that we're concerned maybe having suicidal thoughts, but we feel like we can empower people by educating them as to what the signs are and then teaching them just how to ask that question. And data shows us that asking the question is not going to put an idea in their head that's not already there. So we can just wipe out that fear right now. Evidence shows us that's not the case. So if we're hearing from someone that we love or someone that we care about, a colleague or anybody, that they're threatening to hurt themselves, they're saying things like, I wish I were dead, or the world would be better off without me, or, I'm just going to kill myself. Don't assume it's flippant. Don't assume that if they're talking about it, they're not serious. Just if you're looking for some other signs and symptoms, maybe they're if you're hearing that, maybe if you're seeing that they're looking to purchase a gun or find some other lethal means of taking their life, like finding some pills, that would be a sign. If they're just talking about it or writing about it all the time, or just very, very dark, or showing hopelessness, like not planning for the future. Unfortunately, especially with younger people, because of the prefrontal cortex not being developed yet, that impulsivity plays a part to it. But breakups can be really devastating to young people. So if you're seeing these things with someone that you care about, and they're angry, or they've had just a complete dramatic change in their moods, or if someone that they really care about, or even a celebrity that they care about has taken their life, these can be things that can set off a warning bell in our head. That, hey, these are some warning signs. We're going to have to talk to this person, right? And so we're just going to ask we're going to make the ask, right? We're just going to say, look, I care about you. And I have observed in the last couple of weeks that, you lost your job, you lost your relationship, you've been saying some pretty dark things, you've been isolating. I care about you, and I just have to ask the question, man, are you thinking about taking your life? And when we teach QPR, and we do teach QPR, it's like a 1.5 to 2 hour uh, program. It's evidence based. We go through the whole thing. Um, we ask people to practice saying that, because just like in the military, just like anything else, if you practice at it, it's gonna make it easier to do. When you're in a professional setting and it's sort of part of what you do, it's easier to kind of be detached and compartmentalized and ask an individual that you don't know. But it can be kind of intimidating, awkward, daunting to think about, okay, I'm going to ask my cousin. I know he lost his mother. I know he went out and bought a gun. I know that he's been saying some really dark things. But I would just say practice, just practice. And if you don't have someone to practice with, just look in the mirror and practice it. And you know what? If you fumble, so what? Uh, you're going to feel a lot better having asked the question. Um, and you can do it. We're human beings. We're all human beings at the end of the day, and we all deserve dignity. And we are all at some point going to experience some mental health challenge. It might not be a disorder, but at the end of the day, what we're teaching here is empathy and communication. And if you are interested in being what we have recently started calling them heroes with headsets, and you would like to donate your time to be a crisis intervention specialist and work on our crisis line, we will provide the training, and we will provide the mentorship, and we will teach you how to be a hero with a headset. Um, and everything right now is remote. Our training's remote. Our work is remote. And it's challenging, but rewarding. And we are experiencing, as you can imagine, unprecedented numbers calling our crisis center. But you don't have to do that just to be able to take what we talked about today and know that you now have something in your toolbox. If you see somebody that's hurting, and don't be afraid to ask the question. And if you get an ambiguous answer in return, go ahead and re-ask it again. Um, I'd rather have somebody be mad at me than know that I could have asked the question. Um, and if you need some help with that, refer them to our crisis center. They can call or text that number, put that in your phone 24/7, and someone's going to be there to answer that. So you can refer people to us. And if you have something, if you have a situation and you need help navigating, getting someone into help, make sure that you call us on our regular line, or I will put my uh, email and phone number in the chat box, and we will help you out. That's what we're here for. And if you want to attend one of our classes or volunteer, please feel free to reach out to me or to go on our website. We've made everything super easy, so folks can go on, just click on our website. They can hit chat. It'll go directly to our crisis center, or you can make an online appointment for a navigator, or you can make an appointment to talk to a peer, someone just like you, who has lived experience, and we'll help you get through until you can get into some professional help. And then we have support groups. So just don't forget, we got you, and we'll get through this together.
Yeah, thank you, Brandy. I mean, this is a really great resource, and we need to advertise it more. and make it more publicly available with the student population here at Purdue. Starting with the graduate students, I'll make sure that we advertise it in our announcements. We send one out every Monday. So I'll put most of the information that you shared with me on the announcements page. I kind of had one question. You mentioned that you have unprecedented numbers, especially everything that's happening with the pandemic. I'm just wondering how these numbers actually do reflect on those facts that you shared early on, and how exactly is MHA trying to, deal with the increase in demand?
Yeah, those are great questions. So when we delve into our data, you have to take into account that when people call, we ask them for data because we're in the suicide prevention business. It's really, really hard for some of our volunteers, and we're working on keeping them trained. But we have to ask some questions for to get some data, for not just for our funders, but because we want to use it. And so we maybe get a third, maybe a quarter to a third of our callers that will give us that information, and the rest, of course, choose not to, which is fine. But when we look at that data, um, you know, uh, we've doubled our calls, but our suicide assessments, so those really serious heavy calls where we have to do perform a suicide assessment, and determine whether someone is at high risk, and are we going to work with them to bring in emergency personnel. The suicide risks have gone up, and I'm pulling from a 5-month period. Compared to last year, we had 79 suicide assessments, and in that same period of time we had 350. uh, so I'm able to go in and look at the case notes, which I try to do because we really are investing a lot in supporting the folks that are on the lines, and so we want to make sure they're okay. The intensity of the calls have increased, and so we want to make sure that they're not experiencing that secondary trauma from just hearing this over and over again. And so we've actually created a separate pool that's separate from us, where our folks that are manning our crisis lines, and our staff can get access to mental health treatment without even going through us. And in terms of what we're seeing for main reasons, uh, you know, it's suicide, it's interpersonal relationships, domestic violence, abuse, and we're seeing loneliness and isolation as being some of the main factors for why people are calling in. When we look at our screening data, and I can't believe I forgot to talk about that, but on our website too, you can also access free anonymous online screenings. Maybe you watch this presentation, you're like, holy cow, I think maybe I'm having some of those signs and symptoms. It's been more than 2 weeks. You can go on our website and take a free anonymous online screening. Um, we do. There are places for people to put in data if they choose, and we get a lot of data from that. And so when we look at the data from the crisis center, and we look at the data from the screenings, these are people that are seeking help, which is really good. We're seeing, as I spoke to a little bit earlier, 18 to 24-year-old is our vulnerable population. Those are the people that are seeking help at the highest rates. Of that group, the majority of them are students, and a very high LGBTQ rate of population that are taking our um, our screenings. And we also see that it's about 68% females and 30% males, and that kind of. But on the crisis line, which is more reactive, right? We're seeing about a 50-50 split. Um, we're also seeing pretty high, 65 to 70% that are testing positive from moderate to severe on our screenings, and we can see that about and it varies from month to month. It varies quite a bit from month to month, but just about an average of maybe 18% are lack health insurance right now. So when you look at that, and then you look at the main things that are contributing on our screenings, which is loneliness, past trauma, the COVID-19 virus, and finances, and civil unrest, we know that we have got to, when we look at both sets of data, we know that we have got to get to the colleges, and so that's what we're doing. That's why it was so great that you reached out. We've been working with the College of Engineering. We created a series of short videos addressing loneliness, stress, and a lot of the mental health stuff and suicide prevention that we talked about. And those will be available too. Those are going to be available to everybody once we get the memorandum of agreement situated out with the university. We are devoting our Brown Bag series, which is the second Wednesday of the month. We do it's virtual now. It's called a Brown Bag series, and people can sign up for it. I need to double check and make sure that they can sign up for it on our website. But we want to be able to reach the college students. So we are focusing our next quarter on reaching you guys. And so we're going to be bringing in, organizations and agencies that provide services specifically for campus students. And we are going to be showcasing that and trying to get a better presence on the university or in the university ourselves. So any way that you can make that happen, that's going to benefit both our efforts based on what we're seeing with the data and hopefully the individuals that need the help the most. We've also designated a staff part-time to be on campus at the Found, which is it's on campus. Are you familiar with the Found at all? Okay, I'm gonna pull it up here real quick while I talk about it to get the exact address. And it is I believe it is it's faith-based, but they serve everybody regardless of their faith or whether they have faith at all. And that is not the right one. They have a food pantry that is accessible for anybody, staff or students, graduate students, anybody who needs it. And they are located, I got it up right now. Pastor Rodney is the director over there. They're actually located at 200 North Russell Street.
Okay,
And
is it Ace Campus Food Pantry?
is it what?
Ace Campus Food Pantry, the Baptist Student Foundation.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so we'll be having them on a panel along with CAPS.
Mm-hmm.
And we're asking the Purdue College of Engineering, and actually it might be really good for you to join that panel as well. What we want to do is we want to appeal to the college students right now so that we can let them know what's out there and just open up that dialogue. Let's talk about it. Because when you talk about things, you take the power away. There's a old saying, I have no idea who said it, but a pain shared is a pain cut in half. And that is so simple, but so true. And just to know that you're not alone and that there's resources out there. So we've dedicated, we're having a peer recovery specialist at the Found 3 days a week. Monday and Friday from noon to 4, and then Wednesdays from 4 to 8. So You know, you can sign up on the website. You can just go over there and talk to them. They're trained. They're trained as crisis intervention specialists. They're trained as certified peer recovery specialists. And their job is to listen, and they've walked the path of recovery. So they're able to speak from a place of lived experience. And so that's the ways, those are the ways that we're addressing what we're seeing. We're also working with several different departments within Purdue, just to look at our data, to look for trends, there's one department that is working with us to help us with mental health wellness presentations for industries, for businesses, because that's also a place where mental health services are lacking. A lot of folks don't want to, tell their supervisor that they're experiencing something for fear of repercussions. And it really doesn't matter if that fear is valid or not. If the fear is there, it's a barrier. So our job is just to remove as many barriers as we can, um, and really celebrate the recovery aspect, and provide hope and
We need to recognize it and act towards it, and yeah, celebrate the recovery. Yeah. On that note, I shall